These are the best iPad Pros we've ever created. Good morning.
What happened to the ultra-wide camera?
Oh, well, you know, we decided to get rid of that. We didn't need that anymore, so...
Do they still have millimeter wave 5G?
No. We decided to remove that, even though we love 5G.
Does it at least work with my last Magic Keyboard case?
No, because of the new thinner size. It's the thinnest product we've ever made. None of your old iPad accessories will work with the new Pro.
But my Apple Pencil will still work, right?
No. You'll have to buy the new and improved Apple Pencil Pro.
Oh, God. Well, are the prices the same?
No, there's a price hike as well, but we did introduce a nano-textured glass option.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds cool. How much is it?
It starts at $1,700. Alright, a pretty well-paced Apple event in my opinion, even if all of the announcements were not exactly what everybody hoped they would be. Like usual, people's expectations were way up here, so a lot of them were let down. I was pleasantly surprised, especially by the pricing. I thought a lot of the pricing today was pretty reasonable. But the one thing I want to get out of the way from the beginning of today's announcements is the compatibility questions, because there is so much fine print attached to all of the new announcements between the new iPad Airs and Pros, and the new keyboard cases and pencil that launched with them. So first of all, the Apple Pencil Pro, which now has pressure sensitivity, the haptic engine, and probably the coolest underrated feature that thankfully wasn't leaked or anything, is you can actually rotate it to like switch between options, but also for like, you know, non-symmetrical paintbrush effects, you can kind of hover it over the display and know exactly which direction the paintbrush is moving before you actually start drawing. So that's cool. But that new Apple Pencil Pro, which is the same price as Apple Pencil 2 at just $129, that only works with today's announced iPads. You need an iPad Air with the M2 chip or an iPad Pro with the M4 chip, because I'm pretty confident Apple has specifically changed the inductive charging method in which the Apple Pencil Pro pairs with the new iPads, which sadly means for all of you who have an Apple Pencil 2nd Gen already for your iPad minis or your older iPad Pros or your iPad Airs, yeah, the Apple Pencil 2 does not work with the new iPads that just came out. So if you're hoping, I'll just go out and upgrade my iPad, your old pencil is probably not going to work with these. At least that's what Apple's website is claiming. If something changes, I'll keep you posted, but as of right now, I'm pretty confident that Apple has had to change the inductive charging method for the pencil, specifically so that they could move the camera on both the new iPad Airs and Pros to the landscape orientation. And if you pay really close attention, Apple actually did exactly what I suggested back when the iPad 10 dropped support for the Apple Pencil 2, because they wanted that camera on the landscape side, I guess because it's more Mac-like or something. I told them you can still put the charging connector there, just move the webcam over a little bit, and it looks like that's actually exactly what they did. They're trying to hide it because it's kind of asymmetrical, but yeah, the camera is not quite centered. It's just a little bit off, just so they can make room for that new and improved, I guess, Apple Pencil charging method. But yes, it's definitely a bummer that all of our old Apple Pencil 2s are not going to work with any of the new iPads that launched today. Sorry. Also, there's a lot of confusion with the new Magic Keyboard cases as well. So the good news is the new iPad Airs are compatible with the old Magic Keyboard cases. So you shouldn't have to buy a new keyboard case if you already had one optimized for, 11 inch or 13 inches. But the bad news is the iPad Pros require new keyboard cases because, as Apple said, these are the thinnest products they've ever made. The 13-inch iPad Pro is 5.1 millimeters thin. It's just absurd. Jerry Rig Everything is gonna love this thing. It's gonna make him a lot of money, but because of this new thinner design, and also it's slightly wider, it's slightly taller. I don't think there's thinner bezels, but the screen size technically did go up a little bit on the 13-inch iPad Pro, and because of those dimension changes, Apple's website at least is claiming that these new iPad Pros will not work with any old keyboard case. You need all new folio covers, you need all new Magic Keyboard cases, which they did refresh, and while it's annoying that you have to buy all new ones, I am grateful that they're the exact same price as before, and they're better than before, because now Apple has put an aluminum cover on top of the keyboard, so where you rest your palms, at least, is gonna feel metal, just like a MacBook. The trackpad got a little bit bigger and now has haptic touch, so it's not that cheap physical clicky button that we had on our old keyboard cases, so it should feel a bit more premium, and it costs the same as the last generation, but yeah, definitely a bummer that the new iPad Pros are not gonna work with the old keyboard cases that many of us us spent $300+ on easily. But Apple decided to throw in the function keys, just like the iPad 10 keyboard had. But I guess if you want to use an iPad Air, no function keys for you. You gotta go with the iPad 10, or you gotta go with the iPad Pro if you want function keys, which is a little weird, but at least Apple has finally today killed off the iPad 9, so there is officially no more new iPads with home buttons and lightning ports. The USB-C transition has completed amongst the iPad lineup, and thankfully they have reduced the price of the iPad 10 to $349, an amazing value in my opinion, far better price. I always thought $450 was way too high for an iPad without a laminated display, and I hated the fact that it wasn't compatible with the new Apple Pencil, but then they launched the $80 USB-C Apple Pencil, and I think Apple has for the most part kind of fixed all of my complaints with the iPad 10. Having a pencil that connects with the included cable that, came with the box of your iPad so that you can plug it in and charge it and you don't have to use some stupid adapter to get a lightning pencil connected to it. That's been fixed, and again, now the price is more reasonable, so I'm happy with the iPad lineup now. I just wish the iPad mini would have gotten some love because it didn't get anything new today. The iPad Airs, which now come in multiple sizes, I think are somewhat interesting because at least the price didn't go up and they doubled up the storage, so now they both start at 128 gig, and yes, there is now a larger size option, but the marketing of them just puts a really foul taste in my mouth. So yeah, there is a bigger iPad Air now that starts at $799. Technically, you've never been able to buy a new iPad with a display this big for that cheap, so that's good. My annoyance though is that Apple keeps claiming that these are now 11-inch and 13-inch iPad Airs, even though in the tech specs it says actually we're rounding up a little bit. The actual display resolution and size is the same as previous generation iPads. The screens are not bigger than before, but Apple is using marketing, and they don't even bring up this change in marketing in the compare pages to create the illusion that the new iPad Air has a slightly larger display than the last generation, when in reality it's the exact same display size, exact same bezels, exact same dimensions. That's just a little weird. Apple, don't try to play games with us like that. It's a bit more justified, at least on the iPad Pros, because with this switch to Ultra Retina XDR, yes, just when I thought Apple was out of display names, they pulled another name out of their hat. Those displays did technically get a little bit bigger, although it did not result in the bezels shrinking because, like I said, the new iPad Pros are a little bit taller and a little bit wider than their previous generation versions, but they get to call it 13 inches because they're not exactly rounding up anymore. That one seems more fair to me to describe, but yeah, anyway, dual stack OLED displays, tandem OLED as Apple is calling them, has finally made their way to the iPad Pro. This means even for typical everyday usage, they can hit 1,000 nits and they can still hit 1,600 nits for HDR content. And as I mentioned in the skit, they've done some weird things with them to kind of, I don't know, probably keep the price down because these dual OLED panels are likely very, very pricey. So they took out the ultra-wide lens. Yeah, there's no more dual camera on the iPad Pro. No one really saw that coming. There's a LiDAR scanner still. Funny that Apple thought LiDAR was more important than the ultra-wide lens, because I know a lot of people kind of like those ultra-wide lenses, but they were very old. The ones they were using were from the iPhone 11. And there's not a new rear-facing camera. It's not like they improved that in any way. But there's also just this extra black dot. That's not the LiDAR scanner, and it's not the microphone. So we're not exactly sure what it is. Some people think it could be a flood illuminator or an infrared sensor that helps with the new adaptive flash that's supposed to make document scanning better. Apple doesn't seem to want to double down on putting like an amazing, iPhone 15 level camera sensor in the iPad Pro, but they did say they improved the amount of graphite in the enclosure and increased the amount of copper in the Apple logo, and apparently that means these new chassis, even though they're razor thin, should improve the thermal performance of the iPad Pro, which is good because yes, today Apple unveiled the M4 chip, and unlike kind of what I was expecting, wasn't really doubling down too much on it being an AI focused chip, which was what was kind of rumored. No, they're saying that this new second generation 3nm architecture is supposed to result in performance enhancements above the M3 across the board. They're saying much better CPU performance, much better GPU performance. We'll see if these 5mm computers actually let us hit the overhead that the M4 is capable of reaching. I'm guessing it probably won't. But yeah, I am just even more perplexed now. If you had this next generation 3nm architecture, why didn't you just wait a couple of months to refresh the MacBook Airs, which launched just a couple of months ago with the M3? You could have probably waited a minute and just put the M4s on those so that they're a little bit more up to date. Sorry to everybody who bought an M3 Air. I guess your chip is outdated already. But the awkward thing I have to admit about the iPad Pros being this absurdly thin is the fact that the Apple Pencil is now about twice the thickness of an iPad Pro. A lot of people are rightfully concerned that if you're using the iPad without a case, like with a pencil for drawing or note-taking, if you lay it flat on a table, is it just gonna pop the pencil right off? That's gonna get annoying very fast. And also, the price of these new iPad Pros is gonna be difficult to stomach for a lot of people because, yes, now both sizes are getting new display technology, which is cool, but both of them got $200 price increases, which for the 11-inch is a bit understandable because they were going from a LCD display to a very advanced, dual stack OLED panel. There's not a lot of tablets that have these kind of display specifications these days. Luckily, they upped the storage to 256 gig for both Pros, so I'm glad they did that at least, but $1,300 for the 13-inch iPad Pro, that one's actually kind of difficult to justify now. It's the same price gap as before, but before the 12.9-inch iPad Pro had mini LED and the 11-inch did not. So I think a lot of people justified it in their heads as, okay, it's a bigger iPad, but it has this much more advanced XDR display, so that's what you're paying for. Now, both the iPads have this XDR display. Is it really worth an extra $300 for a 2-inch larger screen? I guess some people really want the biggest iPad they can, and Apple's probably trying to justify that, but I wouldn't be surprised if the difference in margins between these products are quite different. Like, I bet the margins on the entry-level 11-inch iPad Pro are pretty thin relative to the other larger iPads with more storage options, which brings me to one of the weirdest things about the iPad Pro lineup is how many feature locks they've put regarding to your storage configuration, more than ever before. So like some things aren't new, like the old iPad Pros that are now going out, they had restricted 16 gigs of unified memory to the 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte storage models. So if you didn't opt for 1 or 2 terabytes, you were left with 8 gigs of unified memory. That's still the same situation here, but Apple's new nano-textured glass option, which is now coming with the iPad Pros, you have to buy 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes of storage to get the nano-textured glass. That's very weird, but my guess is the nano-textured glass is quite expensive. I mean, it's usually a couple $100 extra on a Pro display or a Studio display. So to do it at scale and to do it on a touchscreen that's going to be interacting with an Apple Pencil and everything, it's not that the nano-textured glass needs a terabyte of storage or something. I think the main thing is, it doesn't cost Apple hardly anything to put a terabyte in an iPad versus putting in 256 gigs. Apple spreads out the prices, of course, between those NANDs to distribute the margins so that they can price one way lower and one way higher. But the bill of materials, like the actual difference in the NAND price, is probably a couple of bucks. I think Apple's justifying this by saying, our margins are really, really good on the 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte models because, they charge $1,600, $1,700 plus bucks for those models. So if you're spending that much on an iPad, then the nano-textured glass being an extra $100 is, I guess, more digestible for them. They clearly don't want everybody speccing it for this, but yeah, definitely weird to see the iPad have so many feature differences between the different storage options, and it extends to the silicon now as well. This is a first for the iPad Pro line that I haven't seen before. If you don't get 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes of storage, it seems they give you a binned version of the M4 chip that only has 3 performance cores instead of 4. But yeah, if you spec it up to the 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte iPad Pros, you do get the fully unlocked 10-core CPU with 4 performance cores and still, of course, 6 efficiency cores. We've seen them do that with the Mac lineup for a while, but yeah, you will technically get different CPU performance based on which storage iPad you go with, which is just kind of funny. But hey, if you're really willing to spec up for the nano-textured glass, they throw in the polishing cloth, which we all know is invaluable, so everybody spec it up to 2 terabytes easily. Also, thank God they finally brought a new color option to the iPad Pro, although not that different. It's probably just another coat of paint. It's now space black instead of space gray, which is definitely a welcome change. The iPad Pro colors haven't changed in like a decade. And the cool thing is if you opt for space black, they actually give you a color-matched braided USB-C cable in the box, which I really like. I think Apple probably has some more tricks up their sleeve for iPadOS, and we're gonna have to wait till dub to find out what this M4 chip is really capable of doing. I mean, they did give us some updates with Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro 2. I'm still not interested in paying a membership for these Pro apps, but apparently Apple is getting a little bit more interested in Final Cut finally for the iPad, but not by bringing more Mac features over, just trying to bring in more touch optimized stuff, which is kind of neat because they're saying you can pair multiple iPhones now wirelessly to the iPad and switch between them with this multicam view. So there's a new camera app coming to the iPhone with more pro controls too. That was honestly one of the coolest things about this event was, oh hey, even if you don't buy these iPads, you're gonna get some new software features. Although I'm not sure if you necessarily need the new iPad Pro with M4 to access those multicam features, but it looked cool to just be able to put up a bunch of iPhones and switch between the multicam view and be editing them in real time. I'm hoping all of the guys on the Tailosive Tech podcast could get our phones together and hopefully do an in-person podcast, and we could make it multi-camera with all of our personally owned iPhones, which is just kind of a great, cool idea to just be like, hey, we all showed up to the shoot and now we can all use our phones and have them work together. But I doubt they're able to like stream the actual 4K recordings to the iPad. The recordings probably have to be separate, otherwise the multicam clip is going to be very compressed and not very high frame rate or resolution. So there's much more to play around with that I'm excited to try out later. But overall, I was decently surprised because my expectations were somewhat low. I thought the prices might be a bit higher than they ended up being. I'm glad the iPad 10 got a price reduction and these new keyboard cases. The backwards compatibility thing I think sucks. However, I'm grateful that the price didn't change all that much. And it's certainly a bummer that the iPad Air is still rocking a basic Liquid Retina 60Hz display. Having 60Hz on an $800 iPad with a display that big, yeah, that's gonna be a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. Although they did at least bring the Apple Pencil hover feature over to the iPad Air, but I'm still convinced that's absolutely a software lock. They could add that to older iPads if they wanted to. They're just choosing not to, which sucks. But I'm glad that Apple was able to make a well-paced event where things were moving quickly. There was a lot of changes that I wasn't anticipating, like the gyro in the Apple Pencil. That's really cool. The multicam features in Final Cut were great, and doubling up on the storage for both the Airs and the Pros was very welcome. Well, what did you guys think overall? Were you disappointed? Are any of you considering upgrading your iPads now? Don't forget about which cases and pencils are compatible with which. I think a lot of people, honestly, are going to be quite confused with the new Apple Pencil shake-up thing, especially the Apple Store employees. You know, people are going to walk in with their M1, M2 iPad Pros and go, can I buy that Apple Pencil Pro? Sorry, you need to buy a whole new iPad Pro if you want to use the gyro feature with the haptic engine. Or people are going to go out and buy a new M4 iPad Pro and they're like, wow, the OLED display is great. Let me get my Apple Pencil 2 here and oh, it doesn't work. I wouldn't even be surprised if the magnets still technically align with it. It just doesn't physically charge and pair, which is frustrating that Apple couldn't find a way to make that cross-compatible. I don't know what the issue is there, but something to do with the repositioned camera and the thickness. I don't know. All your thoughts, let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below. And thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you all in the next one.